My name is Sam. I work on an app called Slack. How many of you are Slack users? Amazing, amazing, amazing. I'm going to start, and I'm going to test your Slack knowledge. This is our legacy sign-in screen, and this is our legacy create screen. Sign in, create, sign in, create. How many of you can tell the difference? Well, the answer is neither could our users. So that's really what I'm going to talk to you about. About 1.5 years ago, Slack started on a journey to reinvent how we sign in, to recreate how we sign in. We weren't trying to disrupt the area of sign in or anything like that, but we wanted to take a hard look at what can make our users' lives a little easier. And this was really where we started. There was a lot of confusion about signing into Slack. A lot of users have multiple workspaces tied to the same email. A lot of users didn't know if they were trying to create a team or sign into a team or workspace. And so when we set about to redesign it, we looked at the sign-in and the create flows, processes. I've said the word flow so many times over the last 1.5 years that I'm so sick of it, so I try to avoid it. But sign-in process, and we saw that they had this confirm email step in common. So we took that confirm email step and we put it at the beginning. And we thought that we could kind of sweep a lot of this complexity behind an email confirmation, because you can't do anything in Slack, whether it's create or sign in, without a confirmed email. So this was nice. The issue being that there's a lot more to signing in or creating a team than you would imagine. We're an enterprise app. We have to have SSO. A lot of our big customers rely on that. SSO is kind of a black box. It's really hard to test. We have to have this thing called admin and guests, which we did forget about, and in doing so, locked our CTO out of Slack for a while. I got a Zendesk ticket called Everything Fucked. It came up. It was good. It was good. It was fun. And we also support two-factor auth. So the other issue is also that you can support multiple accounts to singular email addresses. So however complicated it is, you have to be able to do it for the same email address over and over again. And there's no kind of singular account structure. And our legacy account manager was not really set up to handle this. So those were sort of some of the challenges. But to understand kind of how the login process works, I'm going to walk you through it. It's a little complicated. Don't worry about remembering it. It won't be quizzed or anything. But what we are really checking first is if a user has any multi-factor auth accounts, and that's SSO or two-factor auth accounts. And if they don't, we check if they have any standard auth accounts, and if they do, then we want to open Slack, and that's always the goal, right? Is to open Slack. There are some pivot points here. So there's this thing called pending auth, or what we would refer to as whitelisted workspaces, which some orgs use, some enterprises use. And if they have that, we want to open pending auth screen, and if not, we have an empty state there. They have to get back to Slack. A user can have multiple multi-factor auth accounts. Let's say they're part of 2 enterprises or part of 2 workspaces that have two-factor auth, or whatever combination that is. And there's whether they have 1 or 2 it depends on whether we want to open the prompt sign-in or open the multi-factor auth screen. So, and everything needs to get back to Slack. So this was sort of the thing that we looked at and we tried to optimize after we figured out, oh, okay, we can confirm an email, but how are we going to structure our code to make this an elegant experience? So these were sort of the mock-ups we came up with. I know a lot of people really loved the sort of the idea of the magic email login. That's a very Slack thing. It's what we've been known for a long time. I had to have a very difficult conversation that we should kill the words magic login because it's really not a magic login anymore. A lot of apps do it. It doesn't really make sense to call it a magic login. It doesn't feel that magical to me anymore. So we moved away from that terminology and into this thing called an email confirmation. And that was all well and good, and these mock-ups were great. the open email app button, I saw a lot of this one right here. I saw a lot of apps actually copy that after we had released it, which was pretty cool. I use it all the time. And this was the email entry screen, so we decided that we would have an email entry screen, an email send screen, and we could sweep the complexity behind the confirmed email. And then we had to have a really important experience in the side drawer, which was right now this Add Workspaces button that you see, or before this Add Workspaces button that you see, used to take you straight back to manual sign-in. And we knew that if we had a confirmed email, we could auto-add people to their workspaces without having them going through sign-in again. So we had to create a new Add Workspace experience sort of in the app, within the app, once you've already signed in. And so at this point, we're sort of bridging between signed in and not signed in, and that barrier became sort of hard for us to grasp, especially like in our account management and things like that. But this was the solution we came up with. So, and I mentioned these, the empty, state, and pending auth screens, basically for posterity. So that was the first version. There's more to the story, but we were really excited. We were really jazzed. There was a lot of fun. There was a lot of creativity. We worked for maybe 7 months on it, and things went relatively well. And we shipped it, which was great. And this is one of our many great thinking ta-da stare emojis. And the issue was that we shipped it. And the thing about this is that with an app like Slack, where you're onboarding, I think it's close to like 137,000 users a week, you're going to get some negative feedback. You're not always ready for the negative feedback that's going to come for your feature, but it's important to look at it as an opportunity. So we went back sort of to the drawing board and thought, how can we make this better? What's wrong? What did we do wrong? What did we get wrong? And I went sort of to the data, to our analytics, and I was like, what is this North Star that we could point to? What could come next, like in our process that would make this sort of better? And we came up with this number, which is 80% of users have one active account with one email. So we had kind of let the complexity of this really cloud our vision as to what we were building. We thought we sort of had to build in all of the edge cases, but instead we really needed to optimize for a different use case, which is like we really needed to optimize for the standard user, which may sound obvious to you, but at the time we were really excited to like support all different kinds of users and all different kinds of combinations, because as an enterprise app, we are basically, customizable to your liking, and that's what we take pride on. Is Slack is 100% how work gets done, so we are your solution center. So we looked at this and we thought, well, how can we sort of rearrange this Picasso style to get a better outcome? And we figured if we could have like a pivot point where no matter what happens, we sort of open this workspace selection screen, then we would be pretty good. So that's sort of what we settled on, was a breaking point between having all these different flows and kind of configuring them into one. So that's what this workspace selection screen looks like. Again, this may look like pretty obvious, but to us at the time, we were like, this could be really good. So we also took the time to do something really important, which cannot be understated, which is here in the side drawer, we have these multi-factor auth workspaces sort of living alongside of your standard auth workspaces. And that's a big deal, right? Because your workspaces have always been in this drawer, right? And the big win here is that we didn't have to retrain user behavior. We're signing you into your standard auth workspaces or whatever you choose. Everything else that you may or may not want there is going to be in the drawer where it's always been. And it's like, hey, these are your workspaces. They've always been here. They'll remain here for a while. And it was a big win for us because users intuitively already knew where to look for some of these extra auth steps. So, and this is sort of that prompt sign-in screen that I mentioned before as well. So we had these mock-ups and we were ready to build it. And Along the way, we also saw some issues with how we were doing two-factor authentication. When coming from an email confirmation, we weren't doing two-factor authentication natively. And there's an issue if you're using something called app links, which are what used to be deep links, but are now like the authenticated version of app links. If a app can't find, if an app is trying to deep link into itself, it will basically fail, or app link into itself, it'll basically fail and open a browser instead. So we took the time to do this natively, and we saw a lot of login loops drop that way, which is really good. So that was some of the product challenges, right? And of course, this is droidcon. There are technical challenges as well, and I'm going to walk through a couple of those. If you're willing to learn some RxJava and Kotlin in a few seconds, and bear with me. The important thing about this is, so this is how we structure architecture at Slack. It's very vanilla MVP. You have a contract between your presenter and your view that lets you interact with your view via the presenter and unit test it. There's a lot of articles on it. I won't go into it. But the important part is this RxJava piece. We use RxJava. We expose observable interfaces to our model layer, which could be a database, could be network, it could be UFOs. It doesn't really matter. And we expose this observable interface. And so we get a lot of presenter contracts that sort of look like this. And under the hood here in the presenter, we're doing Rx. And so the issue is in your presenter, you have a lot of things that look like this. So you have a service, maybe a login service, and you're subscribing to it. And you have on error and load, on next. The issue being that when you're working in sign-in with this many code paths, or you're working with anything with this many code paths, we were doing a lot of work essentially when our subscriber was getting notified on next events. And this is really brittle code, right? Because it's basically just a long if-else of our conditions, and it's very non-deterministic. And there's a lot of room there for things to break. Someone comes back in a few days, a few months, a few years, and they change something, and all of a sudden, you've broken this long sprawl of call chains, right? And so around this time, I had been reading up around about MVI, which is a lot of Rx boilerplate, and but also how it uses result and event classes to power its sort of like input and output driven architecture model. And we had also been switching to Kotlin around that time, which I've always been a big proponent of. And we started experimenting with something called sealed classes, which, if you're not familiar, is a Kotlin implementation of they're kind of like enums, but they can contain state and they can return multiple instances of themselves. And we found that if we were to sort of structure a result class with our different code paths, and then map to that instance, then we could get essentially in our onNext an instance of that sealed class and then route appropriately, and then our subscribers would be super clean. And this is actually what I'm talking about. So when we're sort of subscribing to a service, we can map to an instance of that sealed class, and then in our subscribe, everything becomes super clean. Everything in Kotlin is pretty super clean anyway. But this was huge, right? Like this was great. Like this makes code so easy to reason about because it's A, readable English, no joinable workspaces, single current workspace, but also B, super deterministic, like very, you can tell what is going on. It's very like great for oncoming developers. You can throw an exception in an else in that when tag, and if any like extraneous code comes in or any extraneous code paths are sort of exercising or flexing your code, then you're sort of defending against, bad coding practices or whatever it is. And so this was really great. And then the other thing is in our errors, and errors are super important when you're doing sign-in, because a lot of the times you're making a request to a login service and you're getting back, hey, this user needs extra information via an error code, right? So a lot of times we're getting an error code of like multi-factor required or two-factor auth or something like that. And we were doing a lot of things like this, which is essentially like casting our error in on error to get the error code from it if it's an API error. And this is like just a lot of work, and B, really bad because this is an Rx stream, right? So first of all, you're in a thread, and you could be in an IO thread and end up swallowing this error if not implemented correctly. So it's a lot of responsibility on a developer, but also this could be a lot of things. It's not always going to be an API error. It could be a null pointer error in Rx2, that'll crash your stream. It could be sort of like an index out of bounds error because we have a lot of arrays going on. It could be a lot of things. So we sort of did the same thing, which is where we can fold this, if it's an API error, sort of fold it back into our Rx stream, and then in your when you're getting sort of subscribe events, then you can check for them. And so your sort of code that's interacting with your view is always going to be in your subscribe events instead of reaching outside of the stream in your on error to sort of like fuck about with the view. Excuse my language. And so this was great, right? Like this was really good. The lesson here is use Kotlin, but this was really great for us. But the issue is like why it really matters, right? And this is actually like, these animations shouldn't be in there. This is actually like a psychological experience, right? Making a first impression on a user or on a person is actually grounded very heavily in psychology. And there are actually psychology studies out there that show that new experiences that contradict a bad first impression, while good, are bound to a different context than the first impression. So no matter how good your app is after you have a bad sign-in process, it's not going to do much until you've exponentially won that over that user's interest. And this is terrible when you're working with paid users or paid subscribers that expect Slack to work great out of the box, or expect Dropbox or Box or whatever app you're doing to work great out of the box. I don't mean to pick on those. I actually don't know how their sign-in process is. So this is why it matters, and a lot of little friction sort of adds up to really big annoyances. And there's like an NSFW quote from our CEO that will drive this home, but I won't repeat it. But so that's really why it matters. And we like to say at Slack that we're competitor aware and customer obsessed. And that's really the goal of this, is that if we hadn't been obsessed with getting this completely right, we would have never sort of gone to the data and seen which users are using it in which way and what was going on. And so this is a mantra that I like to live by, and that's really it. So this is what we got to, and it was a great experience. We have a lot of time left, so if anybody has questions, yeah, totes. Okay. Sure. The question was, now that coroutines are stable, how are we sort of approaching that with RxJava? For those of you that can't hear, it's a good question. We use some coroutines experimentally a little bit. We have them going on, for sure. We've talked extensively about whether we could replace Rx with coroutines. The answer is, if coroutines had enough operators, so that we could do the things that we do with Rx, then yes. But right now, there is some things that coroutines just can't do, right? Coroutines are really good, like instead of spinning up like this like deferred observable just to do something on the background thread when you're not chaining a bunch of operators to it, then like coroutines are great, right? Because you can just launch a coroutine and have it come back, and it's way less code and it's way less boilerplate. Especially if you're in Java, which some of our app is. But yeah, we have coroutines. It's not, we don't see it as like so much as like butting heads as much as like sort of a balance. So yeah. Anyone else? Awesome. This is generally what people's faces look like when I talk about sign-in, just like eyes glaze over. So it's good. All right, I'll be around if anybody has any questions at all. I'm here to answer them. So thanks.